Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very special edition of DN90. Not quite 90 seconds worth of Georgia football information, but we'll do what we need to do. Talk about Georgia acting fast in its attempt to replace Sam Pittman, who, as you know now, became Arkansas head coach this week, and they have struck quickly to hire Matt Luke, the former Ole Miss head coach, a very popular figure there with Rebels players on the open market after losing his job at the end of this season. Maybe not a successful head coach, but a respected position coach when it comes to knowing a lot about the offensive line. And Georgia, obviously knowing that it has a lot of elite offensive linemen it wants to hold together for this class of 2020, has moved fast to bring in Luke into the fold. It is now official. Georgia has put it out there. This isn't just reported or rumored to be happening. It is done. Georgia making it official on Twitter, and we'll show you this. Welcoming Matt Luke here to the University of Georgia. Luke is now that guy officially in place at UGA. We'll obviously talk about all of what this means. We'll talk about what some of the former Georgia offensive linemen have said about their desire to see Georgia move in this direction and the speed with which it all happened. I think if you're a Georgia fan who's been kind of maybe hoping for some good news on the heels of losing the SEC championship game and then losing one of the Dogs' prized assistants, there you go. You see it there coming from Georgia on Twitter, welcoming him into the fold now officially as Georgia's offensive line coach. If you've been looking for some good news, this is it. Luke is a respected coach. It is a clear message to the offensive linemen that are about to sign with UGA and some of the ones considering UGA as a part of the 2021 class. This is a clear message of how much Kirby Smart values quality offensive linemen and how tirelessly he's going to work to put a big-time offensive line coach in place to make those guys feel right at home. So this is a substantial move by Georgia. It's a huge answer to a big need, and I'm guessing a lot of Georgia fans are going to be feeling pretty good about that. I'm going to get a lot of your comments on both Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter here coming up in a moment. Let me read this, though, on Twitter from David Boss Andrews before we get there. Connor Riley wrote about this at dognation.com this morning and read more about that. What David Andrews says, and obviously Boss would know well, part of the New England Patriots, he says if Matt Luke is the next offensive line coach at Georgia, they will be in good hands. He recruited me when I was at Duke. It was my favorite coach that I got to spend time with. Really pushing for this one to happen. That's what David Andrews said. Brandon Cablano, the former Georgia offensive lineman himself, also echoed a similar sentiment on social media. So Andrews is a very good offensive lineman. He understands the nature of the recruiting process. He wants what's best for Georgia. And before this Luke announcement was made, he was touting for it to take place to give you an idea of how this is going to be received around the UGA community. My guess is Georgia fans feeling pretty good about this. We'll dive in and take a few comments here on this special edition of DN90 as Georgia has hired an offensive line coach, quickly replacing Sam Pittman on his way to Arkansas to be head coach. It is Matt Luke, the former Ole Miss head coach, now in that position there for UGA, a guy who's got great experience coaching offensive linemen and also recruiting offensive linemen. It's Matt Luke in here, a part of the Georgia program. Let's pop over to YouTube. That's where we'll start to get a few comments, a little bit of reaction to the big Matt Luke news. Let's find out what folks are saying over here. Silent Chaos says, I think we just need a passing coordinator like Brady, not a complete overhaul of the offense. So obviously Silent Chaos thinking beyond just what's happening here with Matt Luke, and I do get that. The offensive performance for Georgia against LSU left a lot to be desired, and there's a temptation to want to push the fast-forward button and kind of get to the next thing of, well, what else is going to happen? I think if you do that too quickly here on this story, though, I think you are missing the fact that, let's face it, we've seen major programs in recent years have to deal with a lot of coaching attrition, and in a lot of instances, those programs were not all that happy with the coaches they brought in to replace the departed guys. Look at Alabama and the way in which Nick Saban's had to scramble, and in replacing one coach for another, hasn't always felt all that confident about the decision that he made and the process by which all that kind of took place with all that. So I think that you shouldn't be too quickly to gloss over the fact that Georgia has made a pretty big-time hire with its offensive line coach. That's not necessarily going to fix everything at issue with the Georgia offense, I'll grant you that. But this is no small feat here in acting as fast as Georgia has to convince a guy in Luke who was just this past year an SEC head coach. And now that guy will take a position role at Georgia. That's a pretty good recruiting coup by Kirby Smart to convince Luke to do this, to convince Luke to allow his coaching image to be rehabilitated. I'll remind you of what Sam Pittman said yesterday when he met with Arkansas media and fans and boosters. talking about how he learned from Kirby Smart how to take that recruiting to the next level. He called it a level of recruiting on steroids, working in a place like Georgia. Certainly, Pittman credits Smart with part of the way in which he got to become a head coach at Arkansas. And obviously that brand that exists for working underneath Kirby Smart and seeing your coaching prowess extended because of that, I think Matt Luke now kind of puts himself within that same car wash to kind of come out cleaner and better on the other side than he goes into it after not a successful stint as Ole Miss's head coach. But this is a good job by Smart by convincing Luke to take this job, and it'll be, I think, the kind of thing that Georgia should possibly reap some benefits from, to have an experienced guy like this working at Georgia here. Silver Max says, are we going to get a new offensive coordinator? Obviously, a lot of Georgia fans not happy with the direction of the offense. I think it very much remains to be seen what any kind of future coaching change is for Georgia. I certainly think on the basis of the fact that it certainly appears that James Coley's out there recruiting right now, that you shouldn't expect too many big changes on that front, at least for right now. But Georgia has answered its big need for an offensive line coach by bringing in Matt Luke. Let's pop over and get some Facebook comments here, too. We'll take some more on YouTube here coming up in just a bit. We'll find out what the Facebook community thinks about Georgia moving quickly, bringing in Matt Luke as its offensive line coach here today. The kind of guy that has kind of a jovial personality. He was well-liked by Ole Miss players. If you're looking for a comparison of someone who could be a version of what Sam Pittman was for Georgia, Luke would certainly be that. I think this will be a hire that is, for the most part, incredibly well received by most Georgia fans, by close observers of the program. I think they'll be pretty happy with all this all the way around. Philip Sharp says it's a great hire. Now just need a real offensive coordinator, so obviously the dissatisfaction with James Coley continues. Kenneth Wiggins checking in. Appreciate you being here. Chad Buchanan says Luke is a big get. I think that's a good way to say that. Jacob O'Neill says we're going to go after five-star offensive lineman named Van. I don't know if you're talking about Cedric Von Pron. That's a current UGA commit, as Jeff Santel's reported, not expected to sign in December, expected to wait with the rest of his high school teammates there in Louisiana and sign in February, the traditional signing date. But the presence of a guy like Luke makes it a lot easier to hold on to a guy like Cedric Von Pron and to convince other committed players like Joshua Braun and possibly Chad Lindbergh. The Georgia school they liked before is still the one they're going to like now. I would imagine that Lindbergh is, and I should say that Luke is going to be pretty quickly getting to know a lot of these guys, meeting with them. He may have relationships with some of them already, just given his time recruiting at Ole Miss. But I would imagine he's going to be getting to know these guys even better very quickly to let them know that Georgia's a place they want to be, and then the ball will be in the players' courts to decide how much of that message they want to buy into and believe in. By the way, good video images of Luke if you're watching us on video right now. Scott Peterson referencing the thing that cost Matt Luke, I don't want to say it necessarily cost him his job, but certainly it's the final indelible image of Matt Luke at Ole Miss, which was the Elijah Moore celebration after a touchdown against Mississippi State that ultimately led to a penalty, which led to a missed point after touchdown, which led to a Mississippi State win over Ole Miss. And, you know, that's in a lot of ways the signature image for Ole Miss this year, and obviously a reminder that Matt Luke was not a successful head coach. But you don't have to be a successful head coach to be a great offensive line coach. I'm under no obligation to sell this. I think this is a really good move. And I told Jeff Santel when he joined us Tuesday morning on Dog Nation Daily that as a fan of Georgia, I didn't want to get too excited, get my hopes up too much about a guy like Matt Luke coming in, because sometimes these big names and big spots like this, they have a way of not quite materializing the way that you think they might. But in Luke's case, this is exactly the way that it's worked out. I think this is a very bold stroke by Kirby Smart. It doesn't necessarily put Georgia on the path towards a national championship, but I don't want to oversell it. But in terms of stopping the regression, in terms of holding steady with what Georgia is, which is a top-flight program in the SEC, replacing a need, departed coach, big name coming in behind him, replacing this need as quick as Georgia has, I think it says something quite impressive about the overall stature of the Georgia program right now. Chris Collins says Luke will hold on to the offensive line recruits that had relationships with Pittman, and that's obviously the plan. It's one of the reasons why you want to do this so fast, so that for Tate Ratledge, who, as Jeff Santel has reported, will take his official visit to Georgia this weekend, that visit will take place with Luke hired. One of the big questions to be answered will have been answered there at that point in time. In-home visits that are going on this week. You know, you've seen examples of, you know, Kirby being in Kendall Milton's house, of Charlton Warren being in Jalen Kimber's house. Darnell Washington was visited by a whole collection of Georgia coaches, Todd Hartley included, Kirby Smart as well. You're going to see some of those pictures show up of Matt Luke wearing that Georgia G on the crest of his shirt. He's going to be in some of these houses here coming up pretty soon. Ratledge, maybe. Braun, almost for sure. Out to Texas to see Chad Lindbergh. There'll be a lot of that coming here. Scott Mullis says, will some Ole Miss players follow him? It's kind of funny. Nick Suss, reporter for the Jackson Clarion Ledger, big news entity in the state of Mississippi that covers Ole Miss, he did talk about the fact that there was this kind of player revolt upon Luke losing his job. Luke was very popular with Ole Miss players. Now, I don't know how much room George would have for any of those would-be transfers, and sometimes there's kind of a gentleman's agreement that a departing coach like that doesn't necessarily, take a bunch of guys with him. That's just kind of sort of a gentleman's agreement sometimes in the SEC. But it is the kind of thing, though, that reminds you that Luke was very popular, and that's what you need here. That position coach role for Georgia was at one point in time filled with a very popular guy as well in Sam Pittman. And, Luke will go about his business a little bit different way, but having that player-friendly, popular figure in that role, I do think has some real value. Jeff Boyle said, should be able to bring in some new talent, and that's obviously the hope, holding on to what Georgia has, because Georgia had really put a lot of hay in the barn for its 2020 offensive line class as it is. So Georgia had worked really hard to get those guys ready to go, but obviously Sam Pittman was at the forefront of that conversation at that point in time, and now it'll be some quick work for a lot of these guys. And honestly, as much as I won't deny that my chief concern is Georgia being good on the field, that doesn't mean that I can't also have some empathy for the players who are about to make decisions on their college future, knowing that they're only a few days away from moving in somewhere, and now they have to decide, do they want to move to a different place? That's no easy decision. That's no easy choice to make. And so I actually feel, to a degree, sorry for them that their decision process now has to be as hurried as it is. But sometimes this time of year in college football, whether it's transfer decisions, commitment decisions, coaching hire decisions, the importance of the matter really speeds up the thought process in a lot of this. Amanda Parr asked a really good question. Will Matt Luke be with Georgia at the Sugar Bowl? It is not customary usually for new coaches to step in and coach in a situation like this, even though it seems like Georgia could probably use a position coach for a game like this, as many hands as it can get. A lot of times you see, for instance, Kirby Smart wasn't a part of the coaching staff for Georgia in the Jacksonville game against Penn State at the end of the 2015 season. A lot of times it's just sort of left to the guys who are here to kind of coach their way through it. So if I had to guess, Luke will be watching the game but not participating in the practices or the coaching for that game. I'm sure he's got plenty of work to be doing as a recruiter anyway. So if I had to guess, my first guess would be that Luke probably will not be a coach involved in that game, but it is kind of an interesting question. Josh Hobbs says, finally some good news, and yeah, I think this absolutely is good news. I think it should be treated that way. For sure. A few more YouTube comments over here. Brandon Howell says, bring Rich Rod with him. That's the former Ole Miss offensive coordinator. I'm not quite so sure how Rodriguez would fit in here at UGA. Jethro Smith, boy, still a lot of Coley dislike coming from our comment sections, and I do get that. I guess my advice would be, in terms of appreciating the magnitude of this event, don't let your feeling about one Georgia coach cloud you from being able to appreciate the is it shrewd? That's what I'm looking for. The shrewd move that Georgia has made to be able to add another. I'm not trying to carry the water for Luke or UGA, either one here, but I think we can kind of call it what it is. Balls and strikes is a pretty good move. Here's a little bit of the resume details for Luke. That last couple of years being spent as head coach at Ole Miss. Before that, one of an Ole Miss assistants, including being involved in the offensive line. He's also been at Tennessee, Duke, and before that with the Racers at Murray State. Kind of a young guy, just 43 years old, and obviously was a player there with the Rebels. That's one of the reasons why he remained as popular in Oxford as he was. Kind of the people's choice to get that job anyway, especially in kind of a stark contrast to what Hugh Freeze was. Matt Luke just had a very different kind of feel, but unfortunately, that's a tough program to resurrect right now after the real messy situation that Freeze left it in. So Luke was unsuccessful in that endeavor, but now available for Georgia in the hopes of maintaining what has been a very good offensive line for the Dogs here. Silver Max says, didn't he beat Bama twice? Hugh Freeze beat Bama twice in 2014, 2015. So Ole Miss had some success doing that, but once the NCAA came sniffing around to find out about the talent, how it was acquired that helped beat Alabama those couple of years, the Ole Miss program was not quite in the same shape after that, especially given the kind of torrid detail. Is it sordid, torrid? Sometimes I use the wrong words. The kind of somewhat unpleasant details of Hugh Freeze's public life that was also going on concurrent to his time there at Ole Miss. Christie says, what's Luke's recruiting record? He's had some recruiting wins there for Ole Miss. I'll remind you that an example of that, I'm assuming that he was a big-time emphasis on this. Remember, on the heels of losing Laramie Tunsil, who obviously was kind of a controversial recruiting win for Ole Miss responded back to losing Tunsil by bringing in a guy named Greg Little. Greg Little was one of the big offensive line recruits of that era, and it was able to step in as a freshman starter for the Rebels right on the heels of losing Laramie Tunsil. That was an example of a big win the Rebels were able to get in the need for one after Tunsil's departure. So Ole Miss does not recruit at the same level that Georgia does, at least when it's playing by the rules. And so obviously you'll grade on a curve a bit the work that a guy like Luke has been doing. But as I said before, that doesn't mean there haven't been some pretty major recruiting wins for the Rebels there in that sense. Chris Holbrook checking in on YouTube to say that he lives in Mississippi, and this is a great hire. That's great to hear. Joe Barger says, with Bobo going to South Carolina, if we decide to move on from Coley next year, would Kirby go after his buddy and would Bobo leave his friend Muschamp to his friend Smar? Obviously, I think there would be a lot that would have to happen to be able to answer that. I think a lot of that depends on how successful Bobo is in turning around the South Carolina program right now. I mean, Will Muschamp finds himself in kind of a shaky situation at the moment. The Bobo hire for South Carolina was a bit of a desperate hire, given the fact it wasn't even completely sure that Muschamp would keep his job for the 2020 season. So a lot of those questions would be determined about whether or not that Bobo, not even of his own doing, just is back on the open market again on the basis of the fact that Muschamp enters 2020 almost certainly on the hot seat, which is one of the reasons why it's at least a little bit surprising that Mike Bobo took that job. A couple more comments. Ron Warbington says, one, does everybody want Bobo? Please stop. And obviously Georgia's not going to get him one way or another if it wanted him now or not. But obviously Bobo was a mostly successful offensive coordinator for Georgia, leaving after the 2014 season. Somewhat controversial even while he was here. But honestly, I don't think the way that Bobo was treated by Georgia fans was really all that much different than the way any offensive coordinator is treated by virtually any fan base. The general act of play calling is controversial. Fans, when games are lost or when games aren't very pretty, they point to the play caller more than anything else, and that could be some of what James Coley is dealing with even right now. Ron Warbington also says that he pulls for Coley's success, not for his failure. I think that's probably pretty well said. Devin Glenn says that Jim Chaney was kind of very much the same way. Mostly successful, but often controversial. I think that Devin's probably right about that. Connor Lenine says, which recruit do you think he visits first? Boy, that's a really good question. Is it... Boy, that's a very interesting question. It could be that they try to do one of these, barnstorming type tours so that it doesn't appear they favored one guy over the other. They try to hit, Lindbergh, Broderick Jones, Braun, Van Pran, Lindbergh kind of all at once using the private jet. They have the capabilities there too. You see Tate Ratledge on your screen. It's important to note that Ratledge is going to be at Georgia this weekend, but my guess is they'd still want to go in home with him as a precursor to that. So hitting a lot of these guys, I'm guessing they're going to try to do, and I'm not quite so sure this is going to be one of those situations where they try to value one guy over the other. It's kind of like they may want to try to time the social media stuff so as it seems like they sort of hit them all kind of close to the same time. All About the Waves also mentioning Amarius Mims, the 2021 offensive lineman who's out there. You have a lot of those guys. Micah Morris on the verge of making a decision. You've got a number of 2021 guys who are also watching this very closely too, and that's important to remember. Let me get some more Facebook here, and we'll kind of get ready to get off as Georgia has made a pretty big move here to bring in an offensive line coach. John Collins says, on the subject of some of the other stuff that's going on here, yeah. Nate Graham on the subject of John Rice Plumlee. No, I don't quite believe that John Rice Plumlee is going to be getting back to a UGA, but obviously a lot of folks have going to mention that. Scott Mullis says this must be a GA 90 seconds. Yeah, listen, sometimes we stretch past the 90 seconds. Today we certainly have. It's hard enough for us to do 90 seconds when we're trying to. Eric Blink says, don't need Bobo, say no to Bobo. Well, the good news is you're not going to have that to worry about here this year. Dan Judson says some people won't be happy if you have a 15-0 record because you don't win by enough points. Yeah, I understand the frustration on that. I mean, I think everybody ultimately wants the same thing. There's the debate of, ultimately how you get it. And I think a step towards getting what Georgia ultimately wants, a Matt Luke hire is a big step in that direction. John Anthony Raffa says this is a freaking home run. And I think that John couldn't have said it any better. Myra Herbert Bush says great new hire. Totally agree. Yeah, so I completely agree with a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of folks really celebrating this, and I think it's all big news and good news. You better believe that in addition to offensive linemen, guys like Kendall Milton be paying close attention to this. Guys who want to come behind that offensive line and run and have that great success. The work Sam Pittman had done made the job of Del McGee a bit easier, the same way the Georgia offensive linemen on the field made the job of running backs easier. So this potentially has a lot of reverberations for Georgia beyond just the 2020 offensive linemen. There are future offensive linemen paying attention to this. There are future skill position guys who know they have a chance for success in a program that continues to have great offensive linemen. It's been a big part of the bedrock identity of UGA, and Matt Luke's presence makes it at least a reasonable possibility that that identity for Georgia will be maintained beyond this season into the future with new leadership on that offensive line. You can read more about this story at dognation.com. You can chat about it at the forum at forum.dognation.com. Georgia has hired an offensive line coach. It is a name you've heard of. It's the former head coach at Ole Miss coming back to the ranks of position coaching in the offensive line in the SEC. Georgia taps Matt Luke as the replacement for Sam Pittman. This is big news from a Dog fan's perspective. I believe it's good news. We'll look forward to talking about with you more on the Dog Nation video channels and seeing you very soon once again for another episode of DN90.